All right, well, hello everyone. Thanks for coming. Hi. We're going to go ahead and start the training. The training today on the college's faculty evaluation process is going to be conducted by Vice President for Human Resources Stephen Smith and myself. This is by contract. The contract asks the administration and a member of the E team, which I am this year, to conduct this training annually. So this is our annual training. Thank you all for coming. This is our biggest group ever for this event, and we're being recorded, so the stakes are high here, so do our best. We are going to talk today mostly about the process. So it's not real heavy on the purpose of the evaluation. In fact, I think that everyone here knows what the purpose says. The purpose is really to encourage excellent teaching, to share ideas about teaching, to grow as educators, to ensure quality, to support growth, careful consideration, to support faculty creativity, which that phrase is right there in our contract, and so on. So I don't think we need to belabor that. Today's presentation is mostly about process. It's fairly linear as we go through the process. But just to let you know, it's not laid out exactly like the contract describes the process. For example, the E team, what it is, the function of it, is a big part of the FEP, but it's described sort of as we come to it in the point that it's needed in the presentation and so on. So just to let you know, if you're curious about some of those early elements that are in the contract, they will come up, but it may be a little later. So let's see, do we have handouts? We don't have the Article 18 or anything before us, right? Okay, so we have a PowerPoint. We don't have handouts of Article 18, which is probably a good thing resource-wise, because you all have access to the contract, and we're going to go through, with contract references, the basic outline of the process that way, and you can look these up if you need further clarification. We could also pull up the contract if we need to. If we need to, we can pull it up and get into the language, and I have the contract here too. So the faculty evaluation plan is handled in Article 18 of our contract, pages 43 through 48 in the CBA. Someone's playing music in the crowd. These are the major steps that we're going to go through and cover on this process today. Notification, FEP team construction, the FEP team meeting, like what happens during it and so on, the evaluation and observation period, the FEP team examination of the portfolio, and the endorsement or non-endorsement and the various eventualities that may come out of that. So, when do we do the FEP? First of all, you have to realize Article 18 doesn't describe evaluation for people on tenure track, but it describes evaluation for people post-tenure, and it also describes evaluation for people who are affiliate, associate, temporary, full-time, or soft money. So we have two categories to deal with. For post-tenure evaluation, you're evaluated every 5th year after receiving tenure, or every 5th year subsequent to your last post-tenure evaluation. Whoop. Go back here. For affiliate, associate, temporary, full-time, and soft money, you're evaluated in the 3rd and 4th quarters as far as the actual FEP process, the full-blown process. We'll talk about that in a moment because it's a little confusing, admittedly, the way it's portrayed in the contract. Your 7th and 8th quarters, and then every 5 years or 15 quarters thereafter. So the getting lost in my own. Okay, so for post-tenure evaluation, yeah, this is our next stop. For post-tenure evaluation, you're supposed to receive notification by June 1st of the spring quarter prior to the evaluation year. Notification from administration. If this doesn't occur, we'll talk later about what kinds of things can happen, how you would process that. Basically, it would go to the E team to work with. But that is supposed to occur, and it's an administrative obligation. During the evaluation year, there's evaluation and observation in 2 consecutive quarters, and then a 3rd quarter is needed to review the results of the observation and make recommendation. So I just described the timeline for post-tenure. The timeline for the other category, let's say, it's kind of a mouthful, but the timeline for affiliates and et al., let's put it that way in terms of the bulk of us, is like what I just described, but it's a little bit complicated. Let's say a full-timer is hired for the first time, right? So this is their first quarter. Our contract does say, and it does say so in the faculty evaluation article, that they will get evaluated by students for their first 8 quarters. So before these green shaded full-blown FEP quarters begin, they are evaluated through student evaluations in their first quarter, right? In their 3rd and 4th quarters, this is where you get the faculty evaluation process as described in the contract, which involves the team forming, various portfolio contents, and all the processes around that. So in these 2 quarters, that team is not formed. Then it forms, and then student evaluations continue by contract. That's just student evaluations. And then again, the full-blown FEP process is performed in the 7th and 8th quarter. Notice how these quarters that are needed for the review have been indicated. In one sense, you could describe this process as a 3-quarter process, even though it's 2 quarters of review, 2 quarters of collection and review, and then a final quarter for that final review phase. Stephen, anything to add so far?
No, you're doing fine. Thank you.
Are there any questions so far? Bob?
The gap between the 8th and 9th quarter, or the 4th and the 5th quarter for the final review, that is quarter of employment. So if you have somebody who is, say, teaching once a year, that means that essentially on the calendar, that's a 3-year process.
That's correct. That's an excellent point. These are quarters of employment. We might tend to think of these as continuous college quarters, but they're not necessarily for some of these employees. That's an excellent point. Thanks. Betty?
Does the observation check that's on 3rd and 4th quarter do you observe twice, or does it mean it happens either or?
In terms of being observed specifically, the observations? We'll get to that later in terms of what happens during that evaluation phase, but the observations per se, when somebody comes into your class, only have to happen once during that 2-quarter period. Right. Yeah. Other questions? Okay. So, notification. Something tells me I already jumped into a little bit of notification with the post-tenure, but we'll see it again. Post-tenure notification is supposed to occur in the spring of the year prior to the required evaluation. I think the college, there were a couple of years ago, this wasn't happening as regularly and consistently as we wanted. I think it's happening more effectively now, more pervasively. For affiliate, associate, temporary, full-time, and soft money, notification of the fact that the FEP is going to occur has to be given by the 9th week of the quarter prior to the required evaluation. So if somebody is coming up for evaluation in winter quarter, they need to be notified of by the 9th week of fall quarter that is going to occur by administration. Yes?
You just said by administration. So the affiliate and associate faculty are notified by HR?
I don't know. I don't know who does how administration handles that. I believe it's to my knowledge, it's done through HR and then in the divisions, but it's mostly handed.
The administrator is responsible for that notice.
Okay, I'm sorry. So it's division level. Other questions?
So, I mean, this is where I get a little bit struggling in terms of excluding the summer quarter. So again, I have faculty only teaching summer quarters, and then we're saying we're excluding summer quarters. It's an internal contradiction.
That's an excellent point. There are a number of internal contradictions, not necessarily built that way, but it's, look, we have 320, 330 teachers, variety of instructional formats, lots of different units, and a fairly complicated process, which is why we hold this training. So some areas carry anomalies and ambiguities and gray areas, and that's one of the things that the E-team helps with. The E-team, as we'll see, is a team that provides guidance on those kinds of issues. It doesn't act autonomously because whatever they decide that's of any significance has to go to the JUMC, Joint Union Management Committee, but that kind of thing would be handled by E-team in my estimation. Does that?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay. Because that, obviously, you couldn't follow this. And we understand that some faculty are working summer only. We have full-timer who's, we did at least last year, a full-time faculty member who was working Saturdays only. You know, things like that. So lots of different varieties going on, and the E-team could work with that. Other questions? Let's talk about team construction. So as you can see, we keep coming back to the process. We're moving through it. Talked about notification. Team construction. The FEP team consists of the faculty evaluee, the person being evaluated, the unit administrator or designee, a faculty peer who is chosen by the evaluee, and that can be any faculty member who has taught at least 6 quarters, regardless of status or discipline or anything like that. The contract just says any faculty member who's taught at least 6 quarters. There was a bit of an issue on our campus that we worked through in Joint Union Management Committee around this. Well, I'll just quit using the mouse here. About the unit administrator designee. There was a time when, you know, in some of our programs and departments, there's so much evaluation going on and such a need to get good teams around these people that some faculty members who were not program chairs or assistant deans or anything designated like that administratively were being asked to sit in on these FEP teams as the administrator for perfectly good reasons, because programs were having trouble getting these teams staffed, and we just didn't have enough program chairs apparently to go around, etc. However, we took some feedback on it, realized some situations were occurring, could occur, and talked through it in JUMC, and it was decided, we got an MOU out on it, that faculty could not serve as the unit administrator on that team except under very rare and extenuating circumstances. I forget the exact wording of the memo, but you have to really show some very extenuating circumstances, a severe situation, specific to a specific situation, in order to get this approved. And so far, we have had one sort of blanket request to waive that MOU, but other than that, we haven't had any specific requests from any faculty team or anyone involved in this to add a faculty member as an administrator. I'll just say, in my program, when we started realizing this need, I was one of the ones who said, "Oh, sure, I can sit in on that team." Then I thought about it a little bit and kind of looked at it. And if you look at it from a union perspective, which I know we don't all do, but from a union perspective, you really don't want faculty filling the role of an administrator in an evaluation situation just because of some of the things that could happen, unless they are designated as an administrator. So I might be developing this too much because we worked on it quite a bit. Year before last, I think it was. But it does cause some confusion, and it's still a point of contention for people, I think, on our campus to some extent, or it's being discussed still yet. So it's perfectly understood that it's hard to staff all these teams, but with the program we currently have, jointly we've signed an MOU with administration that faculty cannot be administrators on these teams. Of course there's a faculty member on the team, two of them actually, the evaluee and the peer. We're not talking about the peer at all.
So Gary?
Yes.
Or designate, if you have a program that doesn't have an official assistant dean program chair, but you have a program head who gets sort of no release time, but the sort of past practice has been that program head has been involved in scheduling and that sort of stuff. Is that person eligible to be a designee or not?
So I think the question is, and I'm not sure I should answer it, whether someone who is not getting paid for being a program chair but is somehow officially designated as program chair? Are they officially designated or not? I would have to say, based on the MOU, de facto would not qualify for being an administrator on this team. However, that's something that could be examined if we received a specific contextualized request in JUMC on this. That's how the MOU is written. But at a glance, no. If not designated, not an administrator. Any other questions? Okay, so next would come the FEP team meeting. Now, probably going to cause some stress right now to let you know that the FEP team meeting is supposed to occur during the first 4 weeks of the evaluation period. So how many of you are in evaluation period right now? Okay, so 4 weeks. We started on a Wednesday. I think 4 weeks would be next Wednesday. Is that right? One more is 4 weeks? Really? Not from the beginning of the contract. Let's go from the beginning of the quarter. 10th day was Tuesday, so next Wednesday or the Wednesday? Let's not. I don't think we include opening week. I would say. Okay. Okay. So a little more comfortable. So you're supposed to hold these meetings during the first 4 weeks. Purpose of the meeting to agree on the evaluation plan, and the elements of that we'll discuss in a moment. So the agenda should include these items: review the process and timeline, decide on the contents, select the forms, and if there's a contingency for if the team can't agree, which defaults to the E team. Pardon me? We have 2/3 of an E team. Yep. I volunteered to be on the E team this year, and I believe Dr. Tanya Drake has been appointed to the E team as well. And then we choose a third. So we've gone over the process and timeline, but just to point out that would need to occur during this meeting. The portfolio contents are really, this is the heart of what's being reviewed, and this and the discussions around it, of course, are what is supposed to be kind of going on in this evaluation. So the required portfolio contents include classroom observations, as approved by the FEP team. This is all in the contract. Student evaluations for all classes during the evaluation period, or for advisor counselors advising evaluations. An administrative evaluation. There's a particular form for that. We'll show you the forms page in a moment. And peer evaluations. So peer evaluations are required for post-tenure faculty, and they are optional for affiliate, associate, temporary, full-time, etc. The peer evaluations take a little bit of discussion. I'm glad you asked that question. The actual, in in my reading, and I've talked around about this, and this is one of those areas of ambiguity that we need to make sure and clarify, but the way this process is being conducted on campus right now, and I'm pretty sure this came under the approval of last year's E-team and so on, is that each team will have one peer, and the evaluation could be accomplished with that one peer evaluation from that peer. There is nothing in this process that says that peer evaluations have to go out to various peers, or there's no numerology to that or anything specific required of that sort. Actually, a lot of autonomy is given to the team on this and other matters, and so we all know there's a kind of a tradition on campus. I remember earlier evaluations, we used to send out those peer evaluations to people all over our program and get them back, and if teams still want to do that, they could do that. If the evaluee initiated it or the administrator suggested it, as long as they all agreed, they could do so. But what the contract requires is just in my view, and I'm almost certain this is how it's being played out right now on campus, what the contract requires is that one peer evaluation from your peer on your team.
So it's the same thing as a classroom observation from that peer on your team, or is that a separate form?
There's a separate form for peer evaluation, yeah. And the teams can, again, talk about how the material needed to sort of fill out that form and do that kind of evaluation can be conducted. It also offers, I think this is meant to offer some flexibility, peer evaluations or other as approved by the FEP team. So if there is another way to assess peer, what are we assessing, collegiality, in terms of peer-reviewed competencies, etc. If there is another way to do that, this seems to open the way for the team to decide that. So I would say that, some people might see this as a curse. It doesn't say exactly, how many of such and such form, but actually it allows some autonomy, and it does say you need a peer evaluation if you are post-tenure. That peer evaluation is optional for this category, but this is a little point of confusion too. That doesn't mean the peer is optional. There's a peer on the team, a faculty peer on the team, who is helping to review the material, for the portfolio and playing that role. And it's simply saying that, the peer evaluations part is not required for anyone but post-tenure. Steve?
Who are the classroom observations, who is required to observe?
Anyone on the team.
One person on the team?
No.
Or everyone?
Everyone on the team, but once only is sufficient. The team could decide to do 2 observations if they'd like. They could observe, each person on the team could observe the evaluee both quarters, if everyone agreed. But the minimum required is the one evaluation, one observation per person, right.
So can the peer evaluation be the same as the peer observation?
I think some of the information in the peer evaluation form would be generated from the class observation, but there's also a classroom observation form. Separate forms, correct. Yep. I think Betsy?
If the faculty member being evaluated is teaching an online class, does that mean one day, one visit online?
One visit?
One observation, one...
I don't think that's very well defined. I don't think that's very well defined.
So we'll make that part of it.
We, the E-team could give some guidance on that if the teams are having trouble figuring out how to work with that. I already had, I'm being evaluated this year, and we already had our meeting, and I have more than half my load is online, so we've agreed to some access to my courses at some point, but haven't set a time. And for my team, they can go in and look over everything if they'd like. That's fine. But others may want to curtail that or talk about it. And if it needs more definition in the overall system, then we should work on that. But right now, I don't think that's actually defined. Any other questions on this? Seemed like a lot of hands were up. You think? Yeah, Betty?
I'm so confused. The portfolio is not reviewed during the evaluation period, right? That's the final thing?
Yeah, no, let me...
Is the portfolio part of the FEP meetings and everybody looks at it, or is that kind of a culminating thing in the final?
No, that's a good question. Right now I'm talking about the initial meeting and what happens during that, right? But the team should meet again to review ongoing work. There isn't a lot of specificity in the contract about minimum numbers of meetings and that sort of thing. There's implicit review of the ongoing stuff. The first meeting is required by the 4th week, but then teams would be encouraged to, later in the quarter, I would think most teams would want to meet and review maybe what happened in the classroom observations later in that same quarter that the evaluation started. And then again in the second quarter, just maybe meet and coordinate. You know, when are the observations going to happen? You'll have student evaluations to look at. So there can be and probably should be review along the way. But then the final defining review that leads to endorsement or non-endorsement happens, it has to happen after the entire collection is collected because it's based on all of that.
But it says observations during the evaluation period and evaluations during the evaluation period. So you would not have had student evaluations for the 3rd quarter till the end of the 3rd quarter. Would you review them from the time prior to when the evaluation period occurs?
No. No, you'd review them. You're right. You wouldn't have the student evaluations to look at in that first quarter of evaluation. But you'd have them in the second quarter, and you don't use them from previous quarters. Let me go back to the timeline.
That's what's confusing me. It's how that fits in the
Yeah. During this timeline, there can be a number of meetings of this team. It seems to me that the minimum number of meetings during this 2-quarter evaluation and post-quarter review, it seems like that would be a minimum of 3 meetings because you have to meet to organize things in this quarter, set up the portfolio, what we've been talking about. Then there's going to be a need to meet and coordinate in the second quarter and probably review some of the material that's come in. Although I don't think the contract specifies that, admittedly. So, and if you think it should, by the way, or any other points of the contract that you think should change a little, go ahead and suggest that. We're in negotiations right now. I don't think it really says that, but it seems common sense would say you're going to meet in the second quarter as well. But then the contract does speak to meeting in that 3rd quarter, that review quarter, to look back over everything collected in the portfolio.
In my understanding of the contract, there's only 2 required meetings, the very first organizational meeting and the final meeting. The
I believe that parallels what I just said, Bob. Yeah. Yep. I agree with you. I'm pretty sure the contract only requires those 2. It's going to be...
The first meeting may not have a review of any materials, and it's just designated. It's like choosing the observation forms that will be used, choosing the evaluation forms that will be used.
That's right. You're just setting up the whole process.
We'll collect this for 2 quarters, and then at the final meeting, we'll look at
Right.
this information.
If the team wants to do it that way, the contract isn't specifying one way or the other, aside from the minimums, how many times you should or must meet. I have to try to clarify this. This is a scalable process. If you want to do bare minimums, which I understand we have to in many cases, just for functionality, I understand that. But if you want to do bare minimums, I would say that the contract bears a reading which says you only really have to meet twice to set it up, start gathering the material, and then review the material at the end. Now, in my opinion, and the opinion of probably other people, that might not give you the best result in terms of the purposes of this evaluation, because the idea is that you should be discussing it, You should be looking at material as you go through. Wouldn't you want to meet in that second quarter to review some of the stuff that's come in? But the contract doesn't necessarily require that. The contract actually, I like the way it's written. I'm probably one of the few on campus that like this article because it's very, you can go very minimal if you want to, but you can scale it up if you want to for good effect for teaching. So I would agree with what's been said. It only says meet at the beginning and end, but what kind of process would that be? It might be the kind that's needed in certain cases, but you know, each team has to decide if that's what's going to work for them, I guess you could say. And the evaluee should have a say in, of course, using this process to their advantage. Does that make sense, or is it just too ambiguous at this stage? Or some people are frustrated by the ambiguity. Tanya?
Is there a process to play catch-up? I feel like we miss some of the
It would. There have been many cases like that over the last 3 years, and they go to the E-team for a recommendation, and then if, in every case that I've been familiar with, JUMC approves it after the E-team recommends. So there can be catch-up, custom catch-ups, kind of. We've had to do that quite a few times. Any other questions on this? For the coordination and so on? Yeah, that's a good question. Does a meeting in the contract, is that requirement satisfied by meeting electronically? Stephen, do you have a view on that?
It's not prohibited by the contract. So I think it could be allowed. I don't think we really have any precedent for it.
Uh-huh.
It would be worth submitting that question to the E-team also,
Uh-huh.
just for clarification.
Uh-huh.
Whether that would substantively impact the evaluative process.
Uh-huh. I could see, I mean, specifically, if the question is, can you meet for this coordination meeting electronically? It looks like many of us could, probably.
In particular, when you're talking about an affiliate who is teaching all online, it seems rather intuitive that you would also meet online.
Sure. So it seems like that would be an appropriate way for the setting it up. Reviewing the materials might be a different matter, and probably you should consult the E-team on that. In this day and age, I think we have ways to do that, however, so yeah. I think we have to be careful, though, and I understand we're all extremely busy, and there are a lot of these evaluations going on, and many of us are being evaluated and also serving as peers and so on. But we have to make sure and try to invest some good quality time and attention to this process, I think, to help each other teach better and to learn what we need to learn from each other. That's what it's supposed to be for. So there's that, but if it works online, it works. Yeah. Betty?
Would it need to go to E-team if you're doing online meetings for affiliate faculty? I mean, I know of two who actually moved out of state who are teaching online. Peter Sparks being one of them. He moved to Oregon and he used to teach part-time for college.
In my opinion, the E-team should be notified that this is happening, so we can. It's not for reasons of approving or disapproving necessarily. It's informational as well. So the E-team is feeding information to JUMC into bargaining about, hey, this is going on our campus. People are teaching online and they're just not around, and also people have a need to meet and conduct these meetings electronically. We need to work that into the language and the processes. So I would tell the E-team.
Let them know that it doesn't need to be an approval necessarily. I mean, I'm thinking we have a part-timer in education who lives on one of the islands, and it's like, what an effort for her to come to campus for a face-to-face meeting when she teaches for us maybe once a year.
Sure. Oh yeah, that's a big request.
Teaching in Colorado, I think it's pretty, it's just not acceptable to say fly in from Colorado to have a meeting.
Yeah, no, I agree. I would not suggest that to that person either. It sounds to me like we need to work on this a bit, but I will repeat that I think the contract will bear the electronic meetings. push comes to shove, if you will, I think the contract will allow electronic meetings. There's nothing, I'd have to look, especially at the review period, on the details, but I can't think of anything implicitly in the review period that would prohibit online interactivity to make that happen.
Skype works. And multiple people Skyping works.
Mm-hmm. Skyping, and then there'd be documents to get a look at, but we have means to do all of that. Yep.
That was all I was going to say, is that it doesn't have to be just emails. We have a lot of ways where you can actually meet all at the same time and interact all at the same time.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions? These are great questions. Okay, so I'm way behind where we were. Let's see, required portfolio contents. Any other questions on this page then? I think this is the last place we were before the questions. Now, here's where, again, there's great hope in this process for using it to become better teachers and get to know each other's work. And this is where you can do some of this as well. Optional portfolio contents. Do you want to put in syllabi, class assignments, maybe stuff you're preparing maybe for publication, curriculum material, any other information, self-assessment goals, any other information related to teaching, learning, service to students or the college that you think is important and that you would like reviewed. The evaluee can ask to include these things. The FEP team needs to agree on all the portfolio contents. There is, sometimes there's workload involved. I remember I was on an FEP team and someone wanted to put a draft of a 30-page article in their portfolio, and we had to talk about that a little bit. What do you want us to do with this 30-page draft, etc. But I'm just saying it needs to be approved. The portfolio contents need to be approved, and these are optional suggestions. Any questions on this, on the optionals? So, and these are pretty clearly laid out in the contract. One of the parts of this article that are quite clear, I think. Something about this article doesn't translate well. The written page to the process is a little hard to follow in places, but this part about the portfolio contents is pretty starkly laid out and easy to find. So you've got your required and optional. So then the FEP team is also tasked with selecting the evaluation forms at its first meeting, deciding upon which ones of those to use. So there is a page, a wonderful page that worked. And these are the forms that are, approved. So form approval happens through initially the E-team. Like if you have a new form that you want to approve aside from these, you would submit it to the E-team with rationale and a draft of the form, and then it eventually goes to JUMC for approval. You would find here student evaluation forms, administrative evaluation, there's a peer evaluation questionnaire, and then it's broken out for various categories. Just as faculty do many different things on the campus, we have different forms, some of them tailored for those different duties. So let's see. And again, if you have new form ideas, which does occur, submit them to the E-team. If you can't agree on a plan within your team, then there is a process for that, and it's just given to the E-team to help come up with a plan. So we should talk about this E-team. Who are the E-team? This is kind of an overseeing group that is specified in the contract. It includes one administrative exempt employee appointed by the college, by President Lambert, one faculty member appointed by SCCFT. So those two folks are Dr. Tanya Drake and myself this year, and then one additional faculty member is chosen by those two. And Tanya and I haven't talked about this much, but if anyone is interested, please see us. Is that okay, Tanya? She was just appointed, and I just came online with this a week or so ago. Pardon me?
But I was already recruiting.
Duval interested? That would be 2 English teachers. I don't know if we can stand this.
I'm being evaluated. How can I be on it?
Yeah, that's true.
Well, I'm being evaluated, and I'm on the E team, so there's a precedent. So the E team helps provide continuity, addresses new issues or concerns. For example, are electronic meetings okay? That's perfect E team material. New forms, those kinds of things. Recommendations for modifications to the process. Acts as a board of appeals in certain cases, and acts as a consultant in certain cases. For example, having trouble deciding upon portfolio contents, act as a consultant to that. That is laid out a little more specifically in terms of how it works in the endorsement, non-endorsement phases for some of those eventualities, and how the E-team comes in, so we'll get to those as we go along. Is this our slide 20? So, you may not have been prepared for this, but you're going to have before you today a theatrical performance. Yes. This is a skit. Actually, it's readers theater. This is a skit that we're going to read, and this is a mock presentation of the initial FEP team meeting. And it's got built into it some stops where we can stop and ask you what you think about some of the questions that are coming up. Okay? So Stephen and I are going to read on. There are 3 roles here. And there are only 2 of us, so we need a volunteer. I'll be the evaluee, and could you be the administrator? Okay. And we need a volunteer to be the peer. I need a peer for my team. Deval, will you be a peer for my team? You have to come stand behind this, Duval.
Can we blank out?
Yeah, can we?
Can I see the screen?
You may.
What I have to say?
This is live theater. It's half the fun.
You're the
You're
evaluee.
the evaluee.
I know I'm the
Oh, he's the
evaluee.
Oh, he's the
You're the
evaluee.
peer.
You're the peer. Are you ready?
Here, would you like this copy? And Stephen and I know this well.
Oh, you've memorized
We've
it already?
memorized
Oh,
it. That's
no.
fine.
I haven't read this for months, actually. This should be interesting. So, well, thank you all for meeting with me today. Thanks again, Duval, for agreeing to be on my team.
You're welcome.
What is it we're supposed to do today?
Let's see. According to the excellent training I attended recently, we are supposed to agree on an evaluation plan.
What does that mean?
I think it means we decide what goes in the portfolio and pick which evaluation forms you want to use.
That's my understanding, too.
Okay, so let's see. The contract says that for post-tenure faculty, the portfolio has to include classroom observations, student evaluations for all classes, at least one peer evaluation, yours, and an administrative evaluation minimum. Is that correct?
Right, and then there are those optional pieces.
I need to be linear about this. Let's get the minimums figured out first, then do the optionals, okay?
Sure, that's fine. Okay, observations. Shall we schedule observations?
Do I have to have an observation each of the 2 quarters from each of you, or what? Hang on.
It,
Hang on.
2 total.
Right. One from each person on the team. I didn't mention early on a student can be on your team as well if the evaluee wants this. So it could be another person involved too. Any questions about that? Just one observation from each person on the team over the 2 quarters.
Do I need to say my part now?
Yes.
It doesn't say that.
Yeah.
Very linear of you.
It's perfect for you.
In that case, could we wait until next quarter for observations? I'm teaching 2 new classes this quarter, and I'd really rather wait.
Our feedback might help help you with these new classes.
Well, maybe, Stephen, but I think the required student evaluations will help me even more in terms of getting information. And it says here that evaluations have to be done for every class during the 2-quarter period. Would you two be okay waiting until next quarter to observe?
I'm okay with that.
I could accept that if that's what you need. Here's a suggestion, though. What about having, what's her name, come in this quarter to observe, and I'll observe next quarter. I meant you, Al, of course.
Well, sure, that would work for me, I guess. Why don't I email you some days in week 6 or 7 that will work well for me?
Okay. What about my peer evaluation? That's required too.
Well, that might work better after your observation.
Right. How about I write that early next quarter and send it around?
Okay. Sounds
Agreed.
fine. Agreed. Now excuse me.
Now let's talk about student evaluations. As you noted, these are required for each class for both quarters.
I have a question about that. I use my own student evaluation form. I don't like these one-size-fits-all forms. Mine's laid out according to my own unique course outcomes, which are mine and mine alone. Sorry, I'm embellishing. I ask students to discuss how well I've done teaching each course outcome in a narrative way. I think it's a great form. Could I use that?
I think I'd have to consult some experts on that. What do you think, experts?
18. Couldn't you put it in your portfolio along with one of the other standardizers?
That's a great suggestion. You could. Optional, yeah. But as the minimal requirement student evaluation form, it couldn't be used unless it was approved on the list. Good. Let's see.
You all mess my lines up all the time.
Did we?
So the form you use is not on the list of approved forms?
No, why would it be on the list of approved forms? It's my form.
Let's see what the contract says.
Okay, so I think you've answered what the contract says. So again, the approved forms are what fulfill the minimum requirement.
Okay, now that we have the minimums described, let's go for the optionals.
Okay, I have a great evaluation rubric that I used for one of my assignments. Could I put that in the portfolio?
Sure, it says right here, samples of assessment tools used for evaluating student work.
And also, I'm drafting an article to try to get it published in a professional journal. Could I put that in the portfolio? That's the group. Go in?
Does the team have
Good.
to edit it? When I'm doing that?
Excellent question. So can it go in the portfolio optionally? Sure, but these items in the optional are all discussable, and they should be, something that everybody understands will help with the evaluation process and so on. So we would probably talk about it, but sure, it can go in. Okay, it's the end of our skit. And Stephen's going to take over now.
All right, so picking up on the process, we again just want to make sure that we're all clear on the evaluation and observation period involved. Thank you very much. And so as Gary spoke to earlier, for post-tenure faculty, that is during the evaluation year that you have evaluation and observation in 2 consecutive quarters. and the review and endorsement early in the third quarter. So fairly straightforward. And again, for the others, affiliate, associate, temporary, soft money faculty, we have the chart here that's been laid out. So I think it's fairly clear that you have those observations in the the first, the third, and the fourth, as indicated, and then the 7th and 8th, and repeating again in the 24th and 25th. So any questions about those timelines? And again, with respect to the examination of the portfolio, that occurs after the second quarter of evaluation and works into that third quarter for completion of the review. And then the options, as far as outcomes, are either endorsement or non-endorsement. So that's coming into the home stretch of that evaluation process. So again, there we go. And of course, the desired option is to get to an endorsement. So if everything goes well and the team submits a signed FEP endorsement to our office in HR, then those evaluation materials, the original materials, go back to the evaluee. And due to accreditation requirements, it's necessary for us to maintain copies of the original documentation. And we keep that in evidence. It's not used for any other purpose than that after the evaluation is concluded. If there are any issues or problems that result in non-endorsement, then we go to Section E in the process. And so that states that if any member of the FEP team feels that there are serious concerns or issues, then the team will meet to allow the faculty member an opportunity to provide that explanation, to discuss the issues, to identify, again, if there are appropriate remedies to that. If the ultimate conclusion of that is non-endorsement, and the FEP team then believes that improvement is required, they will meet to develop a performance improvement plan for the faculty member. And that is another important final stage to ensure that every opportunity for development is allowed. So, again, if it's not endorsed, there's a meeting with the evaluee, there's a discussion of that improvement plan, and let's see, have I skipped over a slide here? Well, certainly the improvement plan is then copied onto the E-team, and the documentation is maintained in the division office so that the plan can be monitored and appropriately tracked and followed. So again, as we've talked about before, at the conclusion of the process, assuming that the improvement plan is completed satisfactorily, then all the documents are returned to the evaluee, and the endorsement sheet again is submitted, and within 5 days that's sent to our office for appropriate formal documentation. So if the FEP team cannot agree on these things, and if there's issues with the portfolio or the improvement plan, then there's an opportunity to notify the E-team within 10 days, and the E-team has another 10 days then to review and render their decision that then determines those outcomes. And again, we have here that after that 10-day review from the FEP team, then within 15 days, the E-team forwards that to the VPAA with a recommendation whether or not there would be corrective action, or whether some other requirement of the contract would have to be met to conclude the process. And I think that implies certainly disciplinary outcomes as the final result. So we've seen this slide redundantly. We've moved through the entire process and talking through it. Are there questions further about the process at this stage? Amy? Most definitely. You might have noticed that on the link to the forms page that Gary showed previously, at the very top it says the FEP PowerPoint. And so because Gary has very, very kindly and graciously updated this and really made it a finer presentation for us to use, it will be updated soon, as soon as we can have staff post it to the net. So it is already on the web. Gary?
Can you say a little more? It's been a point of
process says they go back to the evaluee, but HR says we need, last I heard, some of that for accreditation purposes, but is it, the way you just talked about it, is the entire contents of the portfolio that HR needs to keep? Or is it only the student evaluations and the, what is it? That's what I'm asking.
My understanding of the accreditation requirements is that it indicates that all original materials that are the basis of the evaluation will be retained so that accreditors can review those documents. So our intention is to ensure that we have essentially a scanned archive of all of the original documentation for that purpose.
So if an evaluee is endorsed, those materials go back to that person, but those materials should not go to their division office.
That's correct.
Correct?
Correct. They're not returned to the division office because there's no further purpose for the division to engage in the use of them. So the only purpose would be, again, accreditation documents on file. And the piece about the accreditation documentation is that we have to make sure that the accreditors can access that information basically via the intranet. So that's something that we're still working out the final mechanics on.
And that would be the only use of that information after endorsement?
That's correct. The only valid use would be for accreditation purposes. Tanya?
Is there a list of individuals who are up for this FEP?
I don't believe we published such a list, and I turn to Ms. Warner for insight.
We can make it available for instance, particularly for the team.
Well, I was thinking, how do the union administrators then know?
Well, they get notified.
Internal
We're not
notification.
notified then.
If you're not notified, would you presume that you don't have that duty?
But we should have a couple folks, so if we have them notified and we know there's a couple folks.
I would say please contact us and let's talk about it. So.
I have a
Yes.
question in terms of the first meeting. Who's in charge there? Is it unit administrator or the person being evaluated? Who's supposed to get all that rolling?
That's a good question that I don't immediately know the answer to, and I would presume that the unit administrator has the lead responsibility for initiating the meeting and for bringing it to order, but I would certainly hope that that's more of a consensus-oriented process. So, Gary, do you have any thoughts on that?
My view on that is that administration is managing the college, and it's a management responsibility to initiate the meeting.
Okay.
So if no one's heard from them, at this point, do we just go about choosing a peer and then hope we'll hear, or do we give a friendly reminder, considering we have a week and a half?
Give a friendly reminder. I would give a friendly reminder.
Friendly reminder.
I think that would be a courtesy to contact the administrator. So, very good question. Other questions? Yes, DeVal.
In the section where you were saying endorsement or non-endorsement, it was saying specifically what's in the portfolio. So I'm assuming then if there are issues outside of the portfolio, they cannot really come into the evaluation process. Only specifically what's in the portfolio can be determined for endorsement or not.
That is my understanding of the evaluation process. So. All right. Are we winding down? I think we've done all our Q&A we can. Thank you very much. And again, thank you, Gary, for helping prepare us for this.